was science fiction. But when you think about it today, Alexa, Echo, Siri, they were all science fiction and things that are a reality. In 1975, Arthur Haley spoke about ATMs, the fact that human beings will be replaced by machines. As recently as 2018, the RBI banned the use of cryptocurrency. In 2020, the Supreme Court overturned the order, and now the RBI has clarified that banks and other institutions can deal in cryptocurrency. Today, as we talk about cryptocurrency, I think the fact that a 350-year-old auction house, Christie's, accepted digital currency for the payment of a $69 million piece of work is something that shows that, this is something that's here to stay. So while we talk about the future, we must recognize the future is already upon us. And with a market valuation of $1.9 trillion, cryptocurrency is something that is very relevant to the present. Against this backdrop, we are extremely privileged to have with us Justice Sri Krishna, an Indian jurist and a retired judge of the Supreme Court of India. He chairs a 10-member committee to draft a personal data protection bill for India. His insights on the data protection aspects of digital currencies will be invaluable for this session, and it is truly an honor to have you, sir. Naveen Surya is an investor, founder, advisor, and fintech thought leader. He is the chairman emeritus of the Payments Council of India and an independent director on several boards and a startup investor. We look forward to your nuanced views on the subject. Arun Vijay is a co-founder and chief operating officer of Geotis Cryptocurrency Exchange, one of India's leading digital assets trading platform. With the focus on the ease of access and a vision to be the go-to platform for digital trading, today he will speak on the practitioner's approach and share insights on the practical aspects of on-ground, of how it happens on ground. Our program anchor, Manu Sheshadri, is a founding partner of MSA Partners. He's a commercial and arbitration lawyer with over 19 years of experience. He advises clients across sectors and appears in a range of legal forums with respect to contractual and regulatory issues. I'm sure this evening's discussion will be extremely interesting in Manu's safe hands. And with that, let me hand it over to Manu.
Thank you. Good evening. We are here to discuss the recent proposal of the government to bring about a law to ban cryptocurrencies and introduce a digital rupee. Of course, they've subsequently retracted on the banning aspect. Now, the law seems to proceed as if cryptocurrencies and digital currencies are two sides of the same coin. Now, going digital, as it were, gives rise to many questions. First of all, what are digital currencies? How is a digital currency proposed to be implemented? What are the regulatory issues? What does a digital rupee otherwise signify? What does it mean for your privacy or anonymity? Does it mean compulsorily registering a digital presence? We have with us three eminent persons who have been involved with the ins and outs of digital progress and innovation, as well as the legal and regulatory aspects in the financial sector over the past several years. I'm going to start with you, Naveen. Now, there is a lot of confusion in the mind of the public as to what is the meaning of money versus currency versus digital currency. I think you could help us broadly define these terms before we go further.
Sure, Manu, and thanks, Punita, and everyone else to invite us here. Thank you very much. So it's a very interesting subject, right? I think money makes the world go around, as we say. And still, when it comes to the nuances that money, currency, digital assets, everyone seems to be very confused that what exactly are they. So like Sunita was talking about a movie, the one movie that I always remember, which is called In Time, which is actually about future of money, where the time is supposed to be the number of years you could live. So actually you could buy And if you kind of want to, let's say, buy a cup of coffee, you're just passing on 1 hour of your life to someone else. And this is like predicted as 20 years later, when we have already conquered, let's say, mortality, and then you can live as many years as long as you could afford to have that many years added to your hand. And everything is like you touch it's biometric, right? You put your hand somewhere, it's through biometric, it just goes up and down. So that said, we're not there currently. Virtual currencies are not that medium yet. But money, what exactly it is? In a simplistic term, in economics perspective, I think it's a medium of exchange. So anything which helps you do a transaction and a transfer value from one person to another person. In some cases, it is store of value. So you kind of putting a value in there and then using it again whenever you want it in bits and pieces. It also is something which is supposed to be acceptable, in some cases universally acceptable, which is not always the case. That a lot more people, if you kind of want to give it as a medium of exchange, they're willing to accept it. So that's basically, so what will be the example of money? The money could be your credit cards, it could be debit cards, it could be prepaid wallets, instruments, checks, promissory note, but they're not currency, they're money, right? So money could be even privately created a coupon which is accepted between, let's say, certain people amongst themselves, or let's say one large party issues to a lot of people and say, hey, I will accept it back as a coupon. So money in that way is very simple medium of a commerce, medium of exchange. But when it comes to currency, that actually is a lot rigid definition, and as per Indian laws are concerned, it is basically money plus legal tender, which means currency in India can only be issued by the central bank and backed by the government. No one else can issue currency in a country like India. And that's where sometimes the conflict arises whenever you talk about digital currencies in the country, because the word currency is affixed. And I think when initially the subject were introduced globally, nobody thought the implication of using word currency, because many countries have a regulation where currency can only be issued by the local government and nobody else can touch it. It has a legal tender. Now, what difference does it make? One big difference it makes is that, let's say if I want to give you a credit card, you can say, hey, don't want to accept it for whatever reason, or a debit card or a wallet. It's not a crime, right? You may argue, you may do whatever, but hypothetically under law, if you have to give a currency to someone, and within the country's law, they have to accept it. They can't refuse it. They can't deny it. That's a fundamental difference. It's a legal tender. It is actually empowering to create a transaction. Also, it is supposed to give you back some value from the government if something goes wrong that you can carry. I mean, what really happens, no one knows, but hypothetically, it's backed by the government. So you're supposed to, let's say, carry those. And ideally, somebody told me that they are supposed to give you metal back or coins back against the value, whatever it is. Thankfully, none of us had to try and experiment that. We are all good economy, we're doing well. So that's a fundamental difference between currency and a money, and people use it interchangeably. And as I said, because the initial experiment around virtual and a digital currency, especially on a crypto side, happened where they wanted to create a democratic currency across the globe. So if you look at this, all started with the advent of internet in our world, right? The moment internet started democratizing first the communication. Anybody could get onto it, send an email to anybody anytime, real-time messages reaches. Everybody could actually communicate and disseminate information. So it also got used to disseminate all kind of information. One news article you could see anywhere across the globe, as long as you know where to reach it, right? So the whole democratization process that happened with internet for the communication, information, and entertainment, for that kind of a play, there was also thought that should we use a currency which is actually more tied up to one country, versus should it be something universal which can actually ride that kind of a development, that kind of a technology, where it is universally accepted across the internet and it is not controlled by government. We are probably better off in our country with the government's control being better, but there are a lot of countries where the people are not satisfied with the country's governance and their currency suffers, and because of that, even the people suffer. So they said, can we create an alternative value mechanism where people have that right to decide where they want to store value, how they want to use? So this is like a slightly longest kind of answer, but those were some initial kind of remarks on differences.
So we have money in the form of coins. We have money in the form of banknotes. We have money in an intangible form sitting in our bank accounts. We use payment wallets to transfer money from X to Y. What is the need for a new form of a digital rupee that this bill proposes? what is the requirement to bring out a digital rupee when there's already cash and coins and all other forms of electronic money available? I mean, including by way of credit card or other payment mechanisms.
Very good question, Manu. So I think hypothetically, every time we moved from one technology to another, I think from paper to, let's say, digitization, and now digitization to further, or rather, let's say, paper to computerization and computerization to digitization. I think fundamental answer has been that it enhances the velocity of transaction, which actually enhances the economy and the overall economic gain to everybody in the economy, right? So every time, simple example, stock market, whenever you reduce the time for a delivery in a transaction from a T+5 days to kind of T+3 and now like T+1, and obviously the today's exchanges for crypto is instant, right? So your volumes increase, your growth increase. So if your aspiration is that the economy has to become digitally globally, and so is the case for our country, the aspiration is to create a digital country. The challenge is that there are again the second coin, which is that in a country, for it to be digital, its economy has to be digital. Its economy to be digital, your money has to be digital. You cannot, and again, I go back to my early days of commerce economics, that money is supposed to be like a blood flow in your body, right? So economy and then economy, money plays like a blood flow. Imagine if your economy is becoming digital, while your blood flow money remains physical, you're going to have a cardiac arrest. They're not going to align. So you need to have digital currency or a digital money available with a lot of people. Now, what had happened is today, while we have many payment instruments and we are one of the pioneers in our payment systems, but when it comes to actual usage of our digital payment options in the country, your population who uses it actively is about 12 to 15% after so many years. And when we are growing over 30, 40% CAGR over the last 5 years. Same way, if you look at consumer spends in digital, they're about 18%. So if you want to be a healthier digital economy, you need to have at least your population access to these options and being able to use it over 50%, let's say, of the population, and at least 50, 60% spend. Now, what is happening is that when it comes to physical currency, it's anonymous, it is universally accepted, it has legal tender, it has all kind of characteristics, except that when it is in a pure play digital, it isn't slightly inferior, but everywhere else, it's superior. I mean, it's a simple example, if you...
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm just coming to why digital rupee. So I'm saying that the reason why the penetration is still not very high, because it is limited to the top 10, 12% of the population when it comes to masses. For them today, something as powerful as money, if that has to be replaced, it has to be only with digital rupee, which has a legal tender, which has same characteristics and superior than physical currency, which actually doesn't work in a digital. So the only answer, if you want to digitize rapidly, is having an option to create a digital rupee. Of course, there are other challenges that we'll discuss, but that was a thought process that, let's say, if I as a government want to send a flood relief somewhere to some people, and if I don't have people in a banking system, how do I do it? If you have a virtual currency, if you have an Aadhaar number, if you have a mobile number, you could reach them there. And because it is a legal tender, it becomes fungible. They could transfer it immediately to the other guys and take it out. So these are some reasons and possible reasons that you need a digital rupee. And I think that's the right path to take. And we should be, actually we are late, we should be accelerating it.
So it'll be useful for inclusion, for bringing the informal economy within the formal sector, and also it's in keeping in mind in the light of a general declining trend of cash use. Anyway, we're going to come to the implementation aspects of it a little further down. But Arjun, I would like to, you are a practitioner and you run one of the largest cryptocurrency exchanges in India. Could you tell us a little bit about virtual currencies, how they work, and what is the technology that underpins them?
Okay. So I think two of the panelists, they started with a film reference. So I'll again start with another film reference. So we live in a twilight world, right? From Tenet. So things are changing so fast. Like the last 10, 20 years, like real, virtual, there is no difference. Like as already mentioned, like $69 million for a digital artwork, like it's kind of unparalleled. The physical artworks don't sell for that kind of price anymore, right? So in this realm, virtual currency or virtual assets, these are the latest form of money, right? So where this all starts, it starts with Bitcoin in 2009. right? What it essentially does is, so in a physical rupee, if I have a 10 rupee note, I can directly pay it to the other person and get goods and services. A digital version of money, it needs to go through an intermediary. Why is it so? Because in digital, you can make copies for really no cost. An MP3 file can be replicated bit by bit, right? So how do I differentiate between a original money and a duplicate money, right? So we have always used an intermediary. It could be a RBI, it could be NPCI, right? It can be like a payment system like a Visa, MasterCard. So what Bitcoin essentially tried to do is take this intermediary away and bring a distributed system where instead of having one or two intermediaries having our entire accounts, make it open so that anyone across the world can see the accounts held by everyone. So this is called distributed ledger. Rather than having a centralized ledger sitting with one bank or one central bank, this ledger is available for all. So if you want to download this ledger of Bitcoin or any of the cryptocurrencies, you will be able to do it, right? And then they created consensus mechanisms. How do we work upon a transaction? What should be the parameters? What is the protocol? How do we transfer? What is the bandwidth? And all those things. And this is kind of the basis of all virtual assets like digital currencies, right? So it started with Bitcoin. So once, like after 5 years, people could see the promise of Bitcoin. So there are other people who thought that why can't we extend this principle to other applications? So then came Ethereum, which is now the second biggest digital asset, right? So there they kind of created the world computer, right? Anyone who wants to run an application, he can create a decentralized application called dApp and run it on Ethereum. So it's almost like a Google Play Store, but it's decentralized, right?
All right.
So this kind of opened up the floodgates, right? So whatever you see in the real world, so counterparties started appearing in the digital world, right? So you have centralized finance here. You have lending activities, borrowing activities. You have exchanges that are operating as centralized. So I am a centralized exchange, right? I am running a centralized exchange. So what if we have a decentralized version of all these things? So then came DeFi, decentralized finance. So you have coins like Uniswap, 1inch. So these kind of coins facilitate these kind of automated transfers. So there's no central body or central authority that governs, right? So what happens is it unlocks value. What happened when control of knowledge went from Britannica Encyclopedia to Wikipedia? What happened when control of operating system went from Microsoft to Linux, right? Open source, right? 10 years back, when you buy a computer, right? Even now, when you buy a computer, you buy a separate operating system for 7,000 rupees, but we buy smartphones for 3,000 rupees. The reason being Android is almost free, right? So this kind of unlocking the value by removing intermediaries is what virtual currencies have achieved. And through that, they are doing a lot of other things, right? What has happened is you also asked a question, right? The need for digital rupee. Our traditional finance systems, they are not transaction based, right? Right now, UPI is clogging the network. Right? You need a lot of transactions to happen. Everything is in digital currencies, in Bitcoin, Ethereum. Every single action is a transaction, right? It's transaction-based currencies, and it's almost like a native for internet.
So all of them work essentially on distributed ledger technology.
Yes. So among the distributed ledger, there are like different ways, like proof of work, proof of stake, delegated proof of stake. Like every currency they are trying to. So this is like parallel innovation happening. Right? So this Bitcoin itself is like less than 12 years old, right? So not final yet. The technology is rapidly developing. So everyone is parallelly working on different tech that can increase the throughput at the same time, not give away the decentralization, right? So Ethereum is on a 2-year roadmap to move from proof of work to proof of stake, right? Simultaneously, you are seeing multiple things work, right? At some point in time, we will see, okay, this particular tech is superior and a lot of other coins might, copy on that. Right, but this is like the 1950s or 60s of internet, right? When you have like multiple companies innovating, trying to come with a better chip technology or something like that.
Okay, that's interesting. So I have a lot of questions to ask on the implementation aspects and how the distributed ledger technology could potentially be used in the context of a digital rupee that's proposed to be introduced. But before we come back to that, sir, Justice Sri Krishna, I have a question for you. Now, in the context of cryptocurrency, yesterday the RBI said it proposes to come out with new rules and regulations for Bitcoin. there is a debate on whether a cryptocurrency is a security, is it a forward contract, is it a currency? What, in your opinion, should the regulatory approach to cryptocurrencies be?
The problem with regulators is, and we saw it happen quite often, if you remember, when there was a classic fight between SEBI and RBI about the type of security that was being issued and that is linked to insurance. Each regulator thinks in a silo. The SEBI says, I will deal only with securities. RBI says, I will deal only with monetary transactions, monetary policy, banking and payment system. Insurance chap says, I will deal only with insurance contracts. Now, if there is a smart chap like Arjun who comes out with a product, which if you ask him, he says, it is not insurance. Okay, go to the next executive, it is not banking item at all. Reserve Bank has no jurisdiction. You go to SEBI, he says it's a market transaction, it's not an insurance transaction. This is precisely the ingenuity of clever chaps like Arjun, who, along with the businessmen, do this. Now, that is why, if you remember, if in the FSLRC, we had proposed a unified regulator so that it was not a silo. He will say, this, that, or the other, somewhere or the other I can catch you. That was the whole purpose. Anyway, that never took off. We'll keep it aside for another day's debate. Now, come back to this. Now, thanks to the recent judgment of the Supreme Court in that, Internet and Mobile Operators.
Internet and Mobile, yes.
Operators case.
Yes, on cryptocurrency.
Actually, a blank check to Reserve Bank saying that Reserve Bank's regulatory authority under all those sections, that A to Z sections of Banking Regulation Act, RBI Act, and the Payments and Systems Act, together makes them the regulator for all these transactions.
Yes.
Of course, their reasoning, the fact that they struck down has given a wrong impression to people. They struck down on the simple reasoning that it is an infringement of the fundamental right and it is disproportionate. That's all. They have not said anything about it. The rest of the Reserve Bank regulatory power, they have virtually endorsed it. So that is really going to be a big issue when you talk of cryptocurrency or any other innovation for that matter. Now, the trouble with see, what is the purpose of all this? Now, in a country, what is this monetary policy that the Reserve Bank often talks of? It is their job to control the prices. How do they control the prices? They look at the total production in the country, total volume of currency that is issued, how much is kept in securities, how much has been invested, how much has gone out, how much has come in. And finally, the trade balance between me and somebody else with whom the constant trade and commerce takes place. Because that is really what determines the true value of your currency internationally. Otherwise, you remember, we had the Soviet economy where the ruble was kept so high as equal to or sometimes even more than $1, whereas their numbers were not known to anybody. That kind of an artificial value can be attached to it. The greatest advantage that Arjun brings to the whole issue is there will be a digital currency which will take care of all these at one shot. Now, if you take it across the world, entire world will know what is the total value of the money that is floating around. Now, how much is owned by you, how much is owned by somebody else, and what is the trade balance. So the monetary policy exercise that the Reserve Bank does can be finished then and there technologically within a matter of few seconds. Now, it takes them a whole army of economists, statisticians, and mathematicians to work it out. Every quarter they do it and say, we add so many points and so many, take out so many points and all. Now, that is the greatest advantage. Number two, what is really the value of money? If you look at it, even from the point of economics, it is, if you go back to history, United States started it way back in the probably late 17th century or 18th century, I'm not sure, but they said 1 ounce of gold is equal to, 16 ounces of gold is equal to $1. That is how they said, and that is how the dollar was linked for a long time to gold. And everybody else who dealt with the United States will link our currency to United States currency because that is a stable economy. Now, why is it that a dollar today is 75 or 74 or whatever is that? Because their trade balance is very much in their favor, and we compare to them, we are not in a position to export to them. This is the simple reason. Now, if you had a distributed DLT across the world, at a given time, you can work out any single moment what is the value of this? The value may change, but I know exactly what is the value of my Bitcoin, whatever the digital currency as
Bitcoin.
against somebody else. The only
Yes,
problem that you have is when simultaneously people are transacting. Naveen was right in his saying that yes, if two people have their own informal method of supposing I issue a note every time and you issue a note every time, credit and debit in my ledger, matter can work out. Reserve Bank has nothing to do. That is my payment system operated privately. But if everybody in the country they had access to it, then it becomes a multilateral transaction where somebody has to take a look at it. Otherwise we will have great people who will run away to Antigua. That is what we are trying to do.
Yes,
So
sir.
that is
So-
exactly what is required.
Yes.
Now, that is where you require a authority like the RBI to make sure that the consumer is not diddled. Now, how do you ensure that the consumer is not diddled? Because you keep constant watch on what is the total currency floating around, what is the trade balance, what is the currency that is estimated to be in black money and supposed to come back to you, which never comes back. All these kind of calculations are made from minute to minute by the RBI. Now, if you have an algorithm by a properly developed software which can do this at the flick of a computer button, you don't need experts from RBI to do it. The currency value will be, now for example, your NAV, take your mutual fund. Your NAV keeps on varying. Your stock values keeps on varying. There is a multilateral transaction going on at the National Stock Exchange, at the BSE. Now its value depends on the total transaction. This is precisely the problem here. Only thing is, with a DLT, everybody is in the loop. Nobody can get out of the loop. Of course, you can get out of the loop, but nobody can come into the loop without any authority. Therefore, it is sealed around with some kind of a ring fencing. The question is, if you are making it applicable across the globe, you have problems with the great FEMA and international monetary transactions.
I'm glad you mentioned that, sir. Yes, yesterday a cryptocurrency exchange was raided by the enforcement Buzzards.
Ecuador, I just read in the paper today, Ecuador has made it officially the currency. But they are smart chaps. They don't have their own currency. They are linked to dollars.
That is true. So in fact,
they hang on to dollars and manage. If you want to have your currency, you must know what your currency is worth at any given time. How do you do that?
That is true.
That is
that
the
is
problem.
true. Perhaps Arjun will be able to clarify that. So essentially, the regulatory approach insofar as the RBI is concerned is that a separate authority is required insofar as cryptocurrency trading is needed, and a separate set of rules, because there are many consumers who are not as well informed, many buyers or users of cryptocurrency which are not as well informed. And it's sort of, and that is something that is still under the process of consideration, because I don't think there is any clarity yet on what it should be treated as, whether it's a security or is it currency, because it's sort of,
Mano,
in some ways,
I grant you there is no clarity. But what prevents Parliament from legislating and saying digital currency is currency or a security or something else? Once Parliament says that, that is the law of the country.
So you're right, sir. Parliament has taken the view. Parliament has not yet taken the view. I'm sorry. The government has taken the view that what I don't understand, I will ban. Of course, subsequently they've retracted.
That is the attitude of all regulators in this country. That is the events against it.
Yes, sir. So before we come back,
I just wanted to add some points here, Manu.
Yes.
So, like Sir said that the regulatory approach here, the answer is very clear. This is not one regulatory subject. And traditionally, a system was working in a division of a role, focus on a specialization. Things have changed. You're working in an internet era where everything converges. You don't have anything which is specialized. Yeah. So suddenly either you have a sorry sir. So either you have
Ravi, finish what you were saying.
We need one window shops.
Absolutely, sir. We need an omnibus regulator.
Yeah. So either we have one regulator like IFSCA in a GIFT City kind of a thing for a whole country doing this. There at least they are. Or if you look at the global approach today, how they have divided it in a sense, and that's something which is already working, wherein it's divided into two clear buckets. one, when it comes to issuing, let's say, these tokens or private virtual currencies, their listing, everything goes to a securities regulator, right? So when it comes to raising money through that, listing them, and then again subsequent trading, this is very clearly like any other securities trading. So it's clearly a security. So in our case, it becomes SEBI. The only leg where the regulator like RBI or a central bank kind of comes in is where right formalities or processes if there is a foreign leg of a transaction. FEMA, like you refer about the last case, the problem is there's no clarity that what processes they were to follow. Something happened, obviously now we're trying to figure out what went wrong, what is right. So that's a separate subject. But basically that's where RBI needs to prescribe that if you're doing a transaction like today, when you invest in a foreign stocks, there's a clear prescription that these are the forms, these are the filings you do. This is how we will monitor. But otherwise it is clearly a securities kind of a SEBI kind of a role. The only role that RBI needs to play is two areas. One, whether these private crypto assets, currencies, whatever we call, should they get used as a payment option for everybody in a multilateral fashion? That is because of the Payment and Settlement Systems Act very clearly become a jurisdiction of RBI, if you want to accept that as a separate. Lastly, the digital rupee, which is a legal tender. Obviously, that is something which again becomes the central bank because they are the one who issues currency today. But even that has to be, so each of this anyway has to be legislated by the parliament. So like sir said, either you legislate, create a separate authority to do all of it integrated, or you divide it in this way, which is how most of the countries, US is doing, Australia is doing, Singapore is doing it, Japan is doing, and it's all a successful model now.
So let's be clear. It is only the RBI in this country which can issue legal tender. It is the only authority which can issue coins and banknotes. In fact, even the government cannot do that. It's only the RBI which can do that. So if it were to come out with a digital rupee, it'll be essentially a coin or a banknote in a digital form. It'll be legal tender. It'll have to be accepted across the board. It cannot be refused. Now, the question would be, how do you actually implement such an objective on the ground? From what I understand, the digital rupee would be based on distributed ledger technology. Now, does that mean you need internet? What if I'm in a remote part of the country? I mean, either due to sheer size or the geography of this country, it's not as if every part of the country has adequate internet. What if I'm in rural Bihar and I want to pay 40 rupees for an auto ride that I took? How do I do it? I mean, will I have some sort of a point-to-point device by which I transfer the currency? Because it'll have to be transferred directly. Now, what are the sort of implementation bottlenecks that you see in? I mean, how would it actually be? I mean, it's a great idea, but it's all about execution, right? How will it be executed on the ground? So if you could just talk a little bit about how they propose to do this.
Sure. So Manu, if you look at how does the physical currency today get used, fundamentally each note, nothing but a unique number. If you would have noticed, right? So there is a digital,
in law there is a difference. The legal currency is only what is minted, the rupee. The Reserve Bank note, that's why you sign that Reserve Bank note is signed by the governor of the Reserve Bank. Now that case, I promise to give you the equivalent rupees, so many rupees, 10 or 100 and 1000. That is just a piece of paper with a promise.
Yes, sir.
Right. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So I was just saying, sir, the process of issuing that physical currency involves generating, so I'm just going on the process side, sir, now. The generating the series on those notes that goes up. Now, if you were to digitize that process as is, what would it take? I mean, forget for now DLT, forget the crypto around it.
I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example. I go to a shop. Now, first question, would it be something I use on my mobile phone to transfer? That is, I transfer digital cash, not even using an intermediary. Or do I have some sort of a point-to-point device by which I transfer it? I mean, how would it work on a day-to-day basis, on a retail basis?
It will be all of this and more. So it will not be limited to this. It will have to be, like I said, that the way rupee works in all physical interaction. This will have to not only just work in physical, but all possible digital interaction. Do we have all the answers today? Maybe not, but it will be continuously evolving. So theoretically, let's say, yeah. So theoretically, if I'm a customer, if I want, let's say, a digital rupee, this is a hypothetical. As I said, RBI has experts committee working on it. Some of us from associations are also trying to see how we can provide all the information. But let's say if I want a digital rupee, it is issued, we will have appropriately choices to transfer our let's say bank balances, wallet balances, those authorized, let's say RBI related license entities in payments and banking, to give us those values, and maybe even RBI directly. The technology does allow even for you to directly allow to interact with them, and this is a beauty of the system. Now, when you receive that money, one of the big difference
about the regulatory thing, there is one issue. Please consider how it will work out. Today, there is nothing like inherent value of even the regular rupee, because today
it's a fiat currency, sir.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's a fiat currency. That's why.
So fiat currency, yes.
Fiat currency.
That's what we're talking about.
To a shop, I might get one tomato for 10 rupees. Tomorrow morning, I might get half a tomato. So even that value varies. So how do you do this exercise? Digital currency is going to be a bigger problem.
It's going to be same as current rupee.
Yeah. So it will be same. So that problem.
There's the problem.
So that problem will.
The price is dependent on the total value of tomatoes, the total number of purchases, total number of transactions. All this is exercise done by somebody sitting in the Reserve Bank. And they come to this conclusion and say the monetary policy in this country requires the value to be assigned to this, and the prices will therefore be not more than this. Then they make all the calculations. Now, if such a detailed calculation is feasible in the case of digital currency, then there can't be any objection. Only
So let me further clarify. So let me further clarify on this. So none of that is stopping. That will happen fundamentally because you have a fiat currency represented in coins and notes. You will have part of that now represented in a digital money or digital rupee. So that core exercise is not changing. Obviously, as the digital part start becoming more, like you rightly said, your calculations, your data becomes a lot easier, lot faster available. But fundamentally, the creation of money with the estimate of your production in next year, budgetary exercise, and through credit, the way you create money, that is not changing. The fundamentals of that can't change. So that will remain as is. Now, having a customer, I could have an option to, let's say, take those monies in a digital form. One change I expect is that it won't necessarily will need to go through the bank account, because bank accounts inherently I see are saving tools. Those are actually like a locker where you use that locker for a savings and a not day-to-day transaction. While your payment transaction and a currency that you want to use on a daily, day-to-day, like a petty cash transactions. So one advantage that this will happen is that you'll create a separate bucket, maybe something like a prepaid wallets with banks and a non-banks, through where you could hold it through them. And again, these are all will be all regulated. You could call them distributor of these financial assets in the economy. So you will have all of those with you.
Ultimately, what will require is some methodology by which you connect the fiat currency to the digital rupee. If that can be successfully done, work out from some statistical formula for that.
So in fact, sir,
then you can do both simultaneously.
So in fact, that gives rise to an interesting question. There are two issues insofar as the digital rupee is concerned. One is what is the operational architecture that would govern this? Would it be centralized? Would it be decentralized? And fundamentally, if I were to pay 40 rupees to a person digitally, who confirms that the payment has gone from me to him? And what is to prevent me from transferring the same 40 rupees to somebody else? So what is the architecture around which, how would there be a central authority which would determine all this?
So Manu, I think Arjun can probably give more details.
I mean,
but
Arjun,
actually Arjun is
how
right
would it work? How would it work on a day-to-day basis? I catch an auto, I go from point A to point B, I need to pay him 50 rupees, I pay him digitally. There has to be a localized way of transacting, the way I just open my wallet and hand over cash.
So see, fundamentally, there are only two things, right? So for any money to actually be valid, so this problem is called double spending in virtual currencies, right? If I send A to you, I cannot use this thing to send it to Naveen, right? That is the fundamental
the same principle would apply here.
Without solving that, there's going to be no payment system. So it can be solved in a centralized manner, like how it has been solved so far. And it can also be solved in a decentralized manner. right? Solving it in a decentralized manner was a huge problem, which got solved by Bitcoin in 2009. Bitcoin showed how it can be done in a decentralized manner. So having said that, if you look at this digital rupee, the issuer is going to be just RBI, right? So they are going to be the only issuer. So when we talk about decentralized nature, there are two ways, right? They are not going to allow everyone to participate. I don't see that happening, right? But
So it'll
they
be
can
a
have
pilot project
participants.
first.
Yeah,
It'll be on a pilot basis first.
it will be on a pilot basis. I'm saying even so, there are something called nodes, right? In virtual
Yes.
currencies, there's something called nodes, which are basically keeping track of what is happening in this world, whether everything is reconciled. They do the audits and see if everything is fine, whether this double spending is happening, whether there is any problem, whether all the transactions are valid. They follow certain rules, right? So when you talk about centralization, decentralization, whether these nodes will be anyone who wants to participate in this platform, or it's going to be only specific entities. Most probably I see it's going to be like specific banks, state controlled banks, or certain people who will be given this node access. Okay, so it's not going to be completely centralized, right? It can be limited decentralization, but it's going to be a choice that needs to be made at the higher level, right? How does government want this? This is number one. Number two, when you ask, right, how do I verify the transaction made and all those things, right? Blockchain makes it really easy, right? Every time a transaction is made, a transaction ID is generated, and hopefully this digital rupee, if they make the blockchain public, everyone could see this transaction at any point of time. It will be easy to verify. Right now it's a black box. When I make a UPI or IMPS payment, I need to go to the bank to check whether the transaction has been processed or not. So in virtual currencies, this is not required at all. From my end, I can just put this in the blockchain explorer. I'll be able to know whether the transaction, whether it has been confirmed, it's not processed, whether it has not been broadcasted yet. So this is not going to be a huge problem, right? So this is how I see it. So these are not huge problems that needs to be solved, right? What, as Naveen said, they're going to create a stack, right? Over this stack, a lot of different technologies can be implemented. It can be through SMS, it can be through debit cards, it can be through credit cards, it can be through mobile apps, right? Which can again work in the form of internet or through near field communication, right? Any form of communication is necessary, right? Basically, I have to be able to authenticate the transaction, right? It can be through my biometric or through a PIN, right? Or by just possession of certain device, right?
So it's interesting that you mentioned near field communication, because in China, the e-yuan has been rolled out on pilot basis in Shenzhen. And from what I understand, they've figured out a way by which you can transfer yuan from person to person without the internet. So I guess something like that would be required here as well. I mean, it's not like we have 4G internet all over the country.
See, as Naveen said, it's not going to be like one technology. It's going to enable parallel technologies, just like how for normal digital rupee, the rupee that we currently have, you don't use just one way, right? You use UPI, you use net banking, IMPS, RTGS, debit cards, credit cards, UPI wallets, right? This will also be a parallel this thing. It will be of a lower cost, right? Fundamentally because blockchain, the auditing, reconciliation is easier, right? Maintenance is easier and they have no downtime. The Bitcoin does not face the downtime in the last 10 years, right? You don't need to do maintenance, right? So
unlike
these kind
UPI.
of benefits come along with it.
I have a question, Arjun. Just think about it. Now, if I have 100 rupees with me, as Manu was mentioning, I take a taxi ride, pay off 40 rupees. There is no way I can pay the same 40 rupees because I'll be left only with 60 rupees. Now, whether it is in cash transaction or net banking or card payment, this works. It always tells me what is my total balance, how much I have spent, and what I am left with, and any transaction beyond the balance is going to be bounced, whichever way you do, whether a check or a net banking transaction or card transaction. How does it work when it comes to digital currency? Because supposing I come to just see the problem that I am facing, I mean, I'm imagining. Let's say I come to you, make a transaction, and I owe you 1,000 rupees. So I say I'm transferring 1,000 digital rupees to you. Now at that time, simultaneously, do you have an access to my balance to understand whether I have 1,000 rupees in my account or not? Otherwise, it's going to be a tough job for you to go home and then find out the digital currency, open out the blockchain and register or DLT and find out.
Absolutely.
So actually, I missed explaining this part. So when I tried explaining digital distributed ledger technology, this is exactly how it works, right? So what happens is when I send 10 rupees to Manu, I don't have to inform Manu that I'm sending 10 rupees. I have to inform all the nodes across. There are like 10,000 people who are maintaining this network. This message is broadcasted to the 10,000 people across. Okay, they all maintain their ledgers. Okay, Arjun is having 10,000 rupees, I'll minus 10. Manu is having 8,000 rupees, I'll add 10. So everyone in parallelly, they maintain the ledgers. This copy of this diary is everywhere. Right? That's why it's called distributed ledger technology.
But that is instantaneously accessible.
So there is going to be some time lapse, right? Because of the internet latency.
See, I take a
Can I clarify this? I'll solve this problem for you. We have already solved this.
Navin, I'll formulate the question, you answer it. Probably there is a good answer to it. I'm just thinking over it.
All right.
Now, I take a taxi. Half an hour later, I go to some shop. I make a payment. Then I go to a restaurant. I make a payment. Now, each one of them, unless they have instantaneous access, will not know what is my total balance. Because today, how do you ascertain it then and then? If there's a time lag, then one of them is going to be cheated.
Absolutely.
I'll tell you the solution, sir.
Yes.
Sir, in our electronic payments also, we face all these issues in a different use cases. Let's say, sir, you have a total balance of let's say 1 lakh rupees of a digital with you. Now there are two ways. Let's say part of that money in today's context, you may use sometime a debit card. Sometimes, let's say you use a card like a Metro card, which has a balance already lying in there. Now, when you use a debit card, right, going into that value, I'm just simplifying it. There are just so that you can understand the possible methods. Debit card is usually used for a higher value. It will always go and check the balance, and otherwise the transaction will not happen. But if you're going to a Metro, where you don't want to go to that online where the money is directly stored in that card and a chip, so maybe in your phone, but you'll need one device. So Manu, your original question that in digital money, surely at the last moment, some electronic device will always be required between two parties for any transaction. It can't happen like with physical cash that no device is required. But to answer your question, just to close this loop, so when you have a device in you where the money is separated out, where the balance is not required, the moment you debit it, it is instantly credited to the other parties. The separate balances keeps getting updated separately for a only transaction commission related accounting. Otherwise, that money is already pre-debited from your original balance. So here there is no duplication.
So the next
like Metro card concept, sir, if you understand, that is what happens. That is exactly what will happen with part of your digital money that will get instantly debited, instantly cleared. So like Arjun was saying that, sir, there is no single solution to this. Money gets used in so many use cases that you'll have to take use of all technologies, all devices, all possible situations, which actually are also being solved today in some ways. It only becomes better here because you have a complete end-to-end chain of everything. So your possibility of things going wrong is lesser and lesser cost and lesser reconciliation.
All that you are telling me, the electronic device through which I transfer money automatically determines in the hands of the other fellow whether I am really worth that money or not. If it is not, it will give me a beep and say, "Sir, iska paas paisa nahi, mat lena."
Sir, in fact, on this issue, from what I understand, it would seem that you necessarily have to have a digital presence in order to transact in digital rupees. That's the first thing.
It could be,
but not necessarily internet, like you explained. NFC doesn't need internet. Internet is separate.
Very well. Your biometric data, your some sort of requirement has to be there. You cannot transact in digital rupees standing outside the system by its very meaning, right? So
absolutely.
This gives rise to a lot of issues, and this is the consistent one of the interministerial committee, the Bank for International Settlements, at private. So, just what is our approach to privacy in the data protection bill? What are our limitations? What is the provisions for privacy? How does it deal with privacy, financial data privacy? Yes, privacy, and if you could also tell us about privacy and also anonymity of actions. If you just tell us how this is being met with by the data protection.
Privacy is declared to be a fundamental right.
Yeah.
So
yes.
cannot be in any way infringed except the triple test that they have indicated in the Kumaraswamy case. There should be a
Yes.
law declaring its objective, the methodology by which it will be done, and the there must be a indicate a connection between the objective and what is the method by which it is done. And it should be a discussion.
Something,
Something went wrong with it.
I think Vinita is the host now. Anyway, so I think,
Continue to say what I wanted to.
yes, sir.
Well, now the right of privacy is exercisable against private individuals against state authorities. The only right that can be conceded then as against private individuals, bottom line is that there should be consent for accessing the by evidence. The state must be conceded some right under extraordinary circumstances. For example, criminal investigation for military secrets and things like the government benefits being granted to you and all that. Now, what has happened is nobody ever thought of cryptocurrency and the digital currency when we talked of digital privacy. The government is stuck with the situation that how do you make this? Something interesting has happened. They think that all financial transactions with regard to India, with regard to Indian customers, must necessarily be maintained. Now, this created a lot of problems for the credit card companies. They do not know what to do. They are in a quandary, they are having a fight with the bank, got a solution for that. Now, in a situation of digital currency, if you are going to extend it across the border, you are going to face difficulty again. Because either we want to switch the localization requirement and the requirement of having going to be a tricky situation. I don't know how the government is. The law is going to be model according. I saw the EDP bill has its own focus. The cryptocurrency bill started saying banning and now they have stepped down and saying already.
No, you're right.
Government saying they're only doing negative. The Supreme Court has gone out of its way and said this has got all authority. So between the three of this,
there are some issues with the hosts. That's it keeps the recording keeps switching on and off. So
Sorry about that. Go ahead, Manu.
hope it's only the internet. It keeps. Yes, sir. We may just continue, sir. I don't want to.
So therefore, the amalgam of these three legal aspects need to be carefully worked out, and unless the government and rather Parliament is able to come to a conclusion, gives appropriate regulatory authority to the regulators, whether it is single regulator, dual regulator, the details are still not known. Because today we still don't, everybody is shooting in the dark.
So the way I see it, if I start paying in digital rupees, I am part of a system, and there is going to be a trace of every transaction, especially if you use distributed ledger technology. And the government could very well scrutinize my spending in real time. The only question would be, am I a person of interest to the government? So, what is the provisions? Is there a provision by which you can anonymize spending data under the data protection bill? Because there's a difference between privacy and.
We are trying an intersection between data privacy and digital rupee or digital currency, whichever way you call it. If you anonymize it, then your DLT will not work. How do you have an anonymous transaction in the DLT?
So can I add? No,
Yes,
it does
please.
work. So there's something called a zero knowledge protocol, right?
Yes.
So there's a coin called Zcash which has successfully worked, right? So which everything is anonymized, but at the same time the balance is maintained. So this technology is even used by JP Morgan in their own interlecture. The thing is, none of the participants know the data, but they'll be able to verify the data. this is like one of the cutting edge
No, but
algorithms.
whose data will be verified? Now,
What?
take the classic example that Manu gave. He gives 40 rupees to the rickshawala and 60 rupees are in his pocket. Now, unless it is recorded somewhere, whose data am I going? Next transaction is with me. And he comes and tells me, I want to buy a stereo for 1,500 rupees without having only 60 rupees in his pocket. How do I verify it?
Okay.
Verification requires, verification of data is with regard to somebody's data, no?
See,
What do you
so
otherwise?
You're right, Arjun. That's interesting, Arjun, that you say that there is a procedure by which it can be anonymized.
So actually, there are multiple ways. The anonymity, we just talk it as a single term, but in cryptocurrencies, there are like variety of anonymity, right? Bitcoin is pseudo-anonymous. Everyone can see everything.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Then there's a currency called Monero, right? You can see
Yes.
the transactions, but you cannot attribute a single transaction to a single address, right?
Yes.
You'll know, okay, these people are participating in this transaction, but I don't know who is doing what, right? And
Yes.
then there is Bcash where you cannot see anything, but the transaction can perfectly be validated, right? So this is kind of beyond scope of this program. So I'm not explaining zero knowledge protocols.
No, I
zero
agree,
knowledge
but
is a cutting
Go
edge.
ahead.
Right? This is completely verified. This came from a
Only
Sudoku problem and other things.
one problem
Having
that
said that,
we face is anonymization is
Okay.
capable of being de-anonymized. Any protocol that you use, there will be a smarter chap who will come and say, I can reverse it. So as far as the PDP
So,
is concerned, it's going to be a big problem.
See, also
So
the
the
way,
way-
digital rupee might be implemented, right? This data can be only be available to the central entity, or this
Yes.
data can be public, or this data can be only available to certain official entities like state banks or the income tax and certain people. So government can devise. So there are solutions for all these things.
That is a direct inroad into my fundamental right. Why? Of course, they also it is done in the end of the Income Tax Act. They must know what money I spend, how much I spend, what are my assets. Only thing is there is a threshold. If my income is only 1,000 rupees per month, they are not bothered about it.
yes.
So that kind of a threshold also can be fixed for accessing it. Otherwise, the access is directly there.
So,
What Arjun is trying to say is that that is the policy that first government and the regulator has to be clear with. I mean, once we have a clarity
Yes.
as to what they want to do with this subject. Play this currency, which is anyway completely anonymous. And then there are three parts of the anonymity or a data. One is the identity of the person who's using it. Second is the transaction data. Third is the balances. At what
Yes.
level, who can see all three and who can see only one of them? That is the rule and the policy, but I agree with you that we still need to continuously monitor it. There are always smarter people who would marry all three. So that remains a subject of, let's say, for everybody's work. And before that, policy for a government to frame. What exactly is in their mind?
See, today we
So-
are all debating on future what will happen. If I get married to somebody, I'll have children and my grandchildren and all that. Am I going to get married? Is a big $1 million question.
Absolutely. Sir.
yes.
And
So
once it is decided, then everything else needs to be decided along.
In fact, this kind of a debate would be really very necessary as soon as they fix the bill, I mean, the parliament passes the law, and then we'll say
Absolutely,
this
sir.
for this kind of difficult.
So,
Yes,
sir, it would make much more sense, or rather, not much more sense, but it would ideally be much more preferable if there is a data protection law in place before they come
Correct.
out with something.
Absolutely. Then you know the parameters of data protection. Go around it for whatever you want to do with regard to digital currency or anything else. Now we don't know. This parameter is unknown. This parameter is yet to be devised. And we are thinking of a conjunction of two.
So it's interesting you mentioned that, sir, because the Interministerial Committee report on virtual currencies talks about the Justice Sri Krishna Committee looking at the data protection laws. And in the meanwhile, they've come out with this digital currency bill. So they note that the committee has looked at it.
Yes.
And they recognize that there are serious data privacy issues out here.
Absolutely.
And they've come out with it while the personal data protection bill is still at the bill stage and yet to be passed or made law.
I have always said the habit in the government is to shoot first and ask questions later. Like in the early 30s, what happened in the Western America. As I've always said, they put the cart before the horse. Exactly what happened in Aadhaar. if they had the Data Protection Act first and then Aadhaar, no such problem would have arisen. They went straight to Aadhaar,
sir.
then people asked them the question, Supreme Court asked them repeatedly the question, but where is the law? Then they have to look around and say, catch hold of Sri Krishna and then make him chairman and make the committee report.
So,
This is
we are actually running out of time, but there is one aspect I want to talk to you about, and that is the government recognizes that impetus has to be given for distributed ledger technologies. It not only would be useful in the context of a digital rupee, but it'll be good for KYC, it'll be good for smart contracts, it'll be good for going forward real estate transactions. And importantly, it'll also be good for international sale of goods transactions. They're looking at ways in which you can use blockchain and distributed ledger technology to fine-tune the process, at least insofar as preventing fraud is concerned. And that seems to be a big issue. Now, in the data protection law, there is a data localization requirement. Would that not come in the way of implementing distributed ledger blockchain technologies in India in the context of sale of goods?
Within India, it might not. If a data localization only says, or if you at least you go by the 2019 bill, we had said something else, 2019 has modified it. 2019 bill says all sensitive data has to be maintained, but it may be processed elsewhere. Now, they have included financial transactions as sensitive data in the definition. So all data with regard to your digital currency transaction will have to be maintained in India. You may process it elsewhere. That's a different thing. But if it is a transaction originating here and going somewhere else, there is no difficulty in maintaining it here. If it's a transaction which is originating elsewhere and coming and getting fructified in India, then also there is no difficulty in maintaining it here. What is the problem there? Because right now, actually, Manu, the Reserve Bank circular says this exactly the same thing. All transactions, you have to have it here on the server. So,
so Manu, actually, as sir said, that the only place it is implemented is in Payment and Settlement Systems Act, and which is exactly what it says.
Today, that is the
if it has a foreign lag,
correct, you are right. For the foreign lag, you can keep it outside, but whatever is the Indian lag, you have to maintain it here. That is exactly what the regulator said.
No,
so
but
there are some operational challenges, but that will get sorted out and the process will get smoothened. So that is a easier solution to find in this whole process versus the other fundamental issues that we discussed.
Yeah, fundamental issues. As I said, we are dealing.
This is a lot easier.
There
will be solution and experience in that.
See, the idea was to discuss all the fundamental issues.
People will appreciate. We are dealing with
this one is relatively smaller issue.
We are dealing with 3 variables. If you know the value of 2 variables, 3rd variable can be found out. But each is a variable. You just cannot fix the value with reference to the other 2. These precisely the problem.
Variable regulator is a variable. Everyone is a variable.
So, but why is there a data localization requirement, if I may ask you?
If you ask me, in 2018 bill that we made, there was a simple question that was raised. And there is a good reason for that. See, the point is, yes, nobody's data can be accessed by the state without his consent. Or under extraordinary circumstances, if Parliament has made an appropriate law for that. All right. Assume that Parliament has made an appropriate law which will pass through the constitutional test. And I want to access the personal data of financial transaction of XYZ because I suspect he is a terrorist financier. Now, if your data is kept in USA or Bahamas or Barbados or somewhere, when I ask you this question, you will say, I don't know, sir. I have only a computer. The data is on the server in USA or California, wherever it is. Now, if that happens, how do you access it? I need it here and now. Had it been in India, I would have served a notice on him, warrant on him, some kind of legal process and say, show it to me but in 1 hour's time. I can't do this even with a valid law because it becomes an international diplomatic tussle. Then you have that famous, mutual legal assistance, MLAT. MLAT takes about 18 months to 24 months. MLAT is such a circuitous process. You have to start with the judicial process, then diplomatic, then government, then go back to it, come back the same way. Now, therefore, we said, hey, you keep one live copy here, you process it anywhere else. Now that was not accepted. And the only reason given honestly by all these big giant companies is that, oh, it's the cost of doing business in India.
Okay.
Cost of doing business cannot be an answer to this.
Geopolitical risk is a real
There
risk.
was an answer.
Geology.
Actually, I was saying that there is an answer to this. You and give me an undertaking, wherever you process it, when I want it by a varied law, you'll produce it within 24 hours. Why can't they do it? But it's so complicated about it. Well, does it not happen in US? The president is, whatever the federal authority says, produce it to me, they'll produce it, even if it is originating elsewhere else. Now, why can't it be done in India? That is precisely the reasoning of the Schrems judgment.
So there is, before we wrap up, there is, I'd just like to get Arjun's perspective on Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. The issue is there's a lot of skepticism around cryptocurrency today. At the same time, there are contradictory points of view on them. One, there are doubts as to whether they are a store of value, but parallelly, in fact, Mr. Nandan Nilekani 2 days back in the Financial Times said they should be treated as an alternative asset class like shares or paintings or whatnot. Then there are people who are asking, how can you trust something that is not backed by the state? Then you have the case of El Salvador, which is using Bitcoin as legal tender. Venezuela has come out with a cryptocurrency called the Petro. So what's the way forward? What is your take on cryptocurrencies, and what is the way forward? How would you reconcile these varying viewpoints?
So what I see is like a lot of innovation is happening in this fintech space, right? People are trying to find different solutions. So even if you look at digital rupee, whether they're going to be friendly for micro transactions or going to be for macro transactions, what is going to be the design decision? All those things, a central body is going to take a call, right? So only a policy decision. But if you look at the world of cryptocurrencies, there is parallel forces operating. A Bitcoin Cash works on a larger block size so that they can process more transactions. Bitcoin wants to focus only on larger transaction size. And then they also have layer 2 solutions. So a lot of things are happening parallelly to come up with the best product. So see, with any new technology, there's going to be, first thing is like, there's going to be a question. Like, why do I need something that I don't see it, right? Look at gold, right? If gold were to be discovered in the last 10 years, gold would also have faced all these same questions. Just because we know it for like 3,000 years, we accept it without asking questions. It doesn't have to be gold. Like 90-95% of the gold is just lying in some bank locker, right? It could be a digital certificate or a platinum or a rhodium or any other metal. It could equally serve the purpose. What if we can digitize it completely, right? Why do you actually need a physical gold, right? Instead of having a gold-backed currency, why can't we have a Bitcoin-backed currency? So all those questions are being asked. So a lot of experimentation is happening, and now countries have started participating in these experiments, right? So if you look at the prices, right, that is the biggest concern for anyone investing in cryptocurrency, the volatility. The price was $63,000 3 months back. Now it's $30,000, $38,000, right? If you look at anything in the infancy, there's going to be a lot of volatility, right? Look at Google, Facebook, Amazon. They were all a startup. Then they were a small cap, then the mid cap, and they became a large cap, right? So they go to a maturity. Even Infosys at some point, it was a small cap and it was having huge volatility. As things mature, right, we know what Bitcoin is capable of and what it is not, right? Right now, people talk all possibilities for Bitcoin, whether it could be the global currency, whether it could be reserve currency, it could replace gold, right? They call it millennial gold. Some of these questions will get resolved at 10 years time or 20 years time. The more clarity we get on the potential prospects, right, you'll have more clarity on the valuation and thereby the price of individual Bitcoin, right? But if you look at the venture capitalists, when do they want to invest in a company? They don't want to invest in a company when it comes to a stock market. They want to catch it up when it's like a startup, right? So Naveen started by saying internet democratized communication, dissemination of information. Crypto kind of democratized investing, right? Bitcoin is technically a proper startup. Ethereum is a startup. So we are able to invest directly in these protocols, right? But who should invest, whether they should take this risk? This is very, very pertinent, right? Normally, only an accredited investor is allowed to invest in a startup as an angel, right? You don't let anyone do it. There needs to be a lot of due diligence. So this is where investor protection comes into picture, right? Government needs to come up with a body that kind of says, okay, who can raise funds, whether they follow all the policies, whether they give proper data to the users before raising funds, whether the fund is properly stored in an escrow, and how they are going to be released. All those things, right? They need to hold on to the word. So when government wants to ban it, right, this is actually opposite. They need to regulate it to protect the consumers, right?
So you're saying it's still at a nascent stage. It's still growing,
it's still growing.
and it is a store of value.
Out of last 10 years, people say they're skeptical about the store of value part, but if you look at the last 10 years, Bitcoin has been the best asset class 8 out of 10 years, right? That's given extraordinary returns. So the volatility mostly has been on the upside, right? People should worry only on the downside when it's going to give you 2x returns, 10x returns. So that's what I'm saying. If you're what happened in 1999? People thought internet is going to be so powerful, right? So that's the reason the boom happened, the bubble happened. When you suddenly find something that has huge potential, there's going to be a rush. There's going to be a huge increase in price. Then there's going to be minor correction. But if I have a time machine, if I go to the 1990s, where will I invest? I'll put all my money in the internet stock because I could see what is happening in 2020, right? Internet is the future. People realized it in 1999, but they invested in wrong stocks. So this could happen in cryptocurrencies as well. People could select a wrong coin, but overall, I see cryptocurrencies are going to be win. So people who are able to get the right asset, they are going to have their wealth increase exponentially.
Okay, so anyway, so we have sort of run out of time, and we have to. There are some questions that have come up, and most of them are in the context of cryptocurrency. And one such question is, if cryptocurrency is subject to so much volatility and does not have any intrinsic value, how could it be an alternative asset class? So that's a question I'll ask you, since you were.
Again, money is basically based on faith. Why do we trust gold? Why do we trust certain countries' rupee? Why Zimbabwe's dollar no one uses? Right? It's all faith, right? Like, why is the shares valued so high? What is the correct price of a certain share? Right? People are saying every share is overvalued in today's listing. The price of something is always what people believe the price is. Right? It's not. It's always decided with the market forces. Right? Even dollar doesn't have any this thing. You believe US is powerful, so you are giving certain value to the US dollar. Right? Money is just a function of faith.
All right. So Naveen, I have a question for you, and this is a sort of a practical question. Physical currency notes have serial numbers, and it's not possible to track who owns a particular note. In digital rupees, it's possible to know who owns what at any time. Now, that's still debatable, though. The question really is, physical currency will have denominations. Will digital currency also have denominations?
So
Like
I think
10, 20, 50, whatever.
so. The beauty about digit is that you start with always the lowest denomination, maybe 1 paisa or a fraction, and then it is divisible and added. So you don't need a fixed denomination. You could create any denomination you want on the fly. For a wholesale transaction, you could create probably $1 billion, maybe $1 billion rupee token, just single one, and just complete that transaction. So I believe it will be the lowest denomination possible, then kind of divisible even after that, and then possible to add to it. Now, about the anonymity part, as we were, I think, already had a long discussion, it's ultimately government policy. And it doesn't mean that you are forced to then digitize all your money on an overnight basis. The RBI motto itself is less cash, not cashless. So currency is going to be there. There are going to be all options available. It's about the people and their objectives and intentions, that what do you want to do, right? Whoever sees benefits, whoever find it more useful, and we've already seen that the digital adoption has happened everywhere. So I think eventually people will see value and adapt to it.
The other question is,
I have one more thing. I have one more
Yes, sir.
point to make. If the digital currency is linked to the fiat currency, its value is determinable at any given time. And in any case, if you are going to operate both, you need a careful connecting factor between them. Otherwise, it will be infinite confusion. I can't give you 50
So
rupees.
logically, if you have to issue, I'm just talking very practically, that you have to have actually the numbers that you're taking out from a one same system. Part of it you print physical, part of it kept for a digital. So it's just one fiat currency. There's no difference, and you have option to just exchange. So it's like you have a bank account with balance. You can use it through debit card. You could use it through UPI. You could use it through net banking.
In other words, you are saying there should be a one-to-one relationship.
Yeah, this is what it is. There's only one integrated fiat currency. Rest is all forms of it. It's like the Savtar thing. There's only one God.
So I have a question that's come up, and that is, if digital rupees are used to transact with each other, it'll be directly from person to person. The way I would pay you money, I'd open my wallet and give you the money that I owe you. Same way I'd do it in a digital form. Would it be in the long term disruptive of the e-wallet business? I mean, why would I need an intermediary if I can pay you directly?
So I think, yes, there is a yes and no answer. One, some intermediaries will get disrupted, but actually for a wallet, because you see today all crypto assets are stored in a wallet kind of a technology, not in your bank account.
But rupees, digital rupees.
Yeah, same thing, right? So what's the difference? See, it's just a nomenclature. The technology, the way you're going to process is going to be same. So actually, I see more entities, including banks, investing in a separate wallet kind of a system and running it on that rail, which is actually capable to handle a lot more high value, high frequency, but low value transactions. So a lot more robust system actually that will come in a play. So I see a huge opportunity, but those who don't build those systems will face extinction.
So initially they could be used to sort of widen the base, and then later on, initially to widen the usage of digital rupees.
I would say net is going to expand because the number of use cases and the money that is still physical, if you digitize, it's actually only going to enhance the scope of all the fintechs.
Okay, so I have another question that's coming up. By making digital rupee legal tender, we mandate acceptance. This requires every citizen to have some basic device or technology solution to be digital and be digitally literate. Today, with physical currency, any numerate person who can add and subtract can transact. Does a digital rupee actually promote or worsen inclusivity? Does it
See, if you add a choice, how does it worsen? It only adds, right? So it is not being made compulsory that this is the only option available tomorrow and currency is not there. This is an addition. And like I gave you example, that sometime for a physical money to reach you, it takes a lot of time. It has its own cost. It has its own implication. Plus there are fake note issues. Plus there are some other challenges of security, right? Stealing, etc. So if you're a person, and as we believe that as a country, our ratio in terms of literacy, digital literacy, gradually growing up. So I see this as a solving the problem, not adding to the problem. Will it solve all the problem overnight? Absolutely no. No technology can solve overnight. It's not like a one silver bullet, but it surely is a direction to give more choices to the consumer and have more better solution for inclusion.
Also, I don't
See, Milton Friedman always said, when there is an inequality, you should give more choices. That's the only way to solve inequality. Nothing else you can do.
So also the question, right? Because it's a legal tender that someone should accept it. I think people will give a relaxation on that. Like no one will be forced to accept a digital rupee because it's impossible to implement. It needs to be implemented. I don't think it will be easy.
Okay. So this is a question for Justice Sri Krishna. And assuming if the value attached to a digital currency is the quality of the information it bears, its ability to verify and reconcile transactions, as against the value attached to the sovereignty of fiat currency, how can one measure the value of a digital currency? Should this valuation be subject to scrutiny or review or revision by the state?
No. What Naveen said just now exactly was the same thing. He said that the total amount of currency in the country will be decided at some level of the government. And then he says partly it will be issued in fiat currency, partly a digital currency, which is also fiat currency really. Because fiat only means it is mandated and legal tender. Now if this is done, there should be no difficulty at all. Number one. Number two is, Now, what do you know about the intrinsic value of a rupee today? How have you determined it? You have got 10 rupees in my pocket. Do I really know what is its intrinsic value today? Yes, it is capable of being discovered if I catch hold of some good statistician, good economist, and a lot of data at my hands and a good MacBook. I can find out it out. Otherwise, what do? I do it by trust. Isn't it? The only thing is, we are all thinking that my baap sarkar is there, therefore sarkar ke paisa hai to acha hai. Now tomorrow if sarkar ka digital currency hai to bhi acha hai. Same thing. Only thing is there, it is possible, as Arjun was pointing out, that even with anonymity, it will make sure that your balance is struck properly and that people don't run away with your money, which happens in honest currency. Which is why we have people running away to London and then to Antigua and to Barbados and all that.
But there are serious concerns that it will be the ultimate surveillance tool in the hand of the government, sir. Fundamentally.
On that, I have my own doubts about it, though I did not very much articulate. The more you make it open, the big brother will have a better chance of looking at. No, see, for example, Manu, take this. With all the IT rules and all that, now every call that I am making, every talk that I am giving to you, is it not capable of being surveyed? It is not capable of being monitored. It is. And I'm taking a chance. If I make a criticism of the government, tomorrow morning I might have an income tax right. I might have the CBI coming after me. That's a chance I'm taking.
Okay, sir. So I think we're just about out of time.
Thank you. It was
Thank you so
We can
much.
take few more questions, Manu. We have time.
We can?
7 more minutes.
Oh.
Yeah, we have.
We have 7 minutes.
It's
Okay,
50.
great.
There are a lot of questions you can take actually.
I'm
Yes.
sorry, I'm showing 50. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm just.
Also, some questions
That's
not
quite-
answered here. I think people can reach out to me directly also regarding cryptocurrency.
Yeah, correct. They can write an email and then I'm sure these gentlemen will be able to give them thesis on the whole subject. What's the next question?
So what the other fundamental question is, what's the difference between a digital rupee and digitally moving money through current forms of payment, e-payment mechanisms?
That was already answered.
See, when you do electronic payments today, there is a 2-leg of transaction that you're doing a payment, authorization, authentication, and then settlement. When you move rupee to rupee, there is no settlement required. It is like when you give a 10 rupee note to someone else, the property in that note is already transferred to the other person. There's no extra step required. So fundamentally, the whole process of transferring the value and extra processes of clearing everything goes away. So it's like Arjun was earlier saying, it becomes highly efficient. There's no reconciliation. Plus, earlier we were talking about acceptability. See, because by nature, the moment you have a legal tender, you can't refuse, right? Plus, because of that, it gives you fungibility. If today I want, with my prepaid money, to go and say that give me full money back, it's not that easy, right? There's a process, there are limits. But if it is money, it is fungible, right? I can just go and convert into fiat currency anytime, physical or anything else that I like.
Okay, I have another question. This is directed to Justice Sri Krishna. And the question is, how can a digital rupee fit into election expenditure and black money use cases? Justice Sri Krishna, I think the question is in the context of anonymity and how this should be an exception to the rule of anonymity, which is that the government should be in a position to track money laundering,
Yes, I
corruption.
understand. Yes. That is why I started saying this at the very beginning and in reply to Arjun's remark and said, what is anonymized today can be de-anonymized tomorrow. There is no difficulty. It's a matter of applying proper technology. Only thing is, the government should be constrained to do it as the last resort. If you are a terrorist financier, yes. If you are some corruption babu taking money, yes. Otherwise, no, you shall not touch it. If that kind of a privacy law is there, there can't be any doubt about it. Now, today also it is there, no?
So
Can anybody be arrested? Sorry, can anybody be arrested? He cannot be. Law requires you to be provided with an arrest warrant, a search warrant. Similarly, you can have similar mechanisms in the privacy law for that.
So what about election expenditure, sir?
So that election expenditure scrutiny is a
Same
matter
principle.
for the same thing. CEC can issue an order and say, all this election expenditure will be, but nobody gives you the election expenditure, no. Where do you get the stamp of election expenditure?
That's
See,
All that you know is digital currency was passed. That is election expenditure. How do you know? And you will see it was not passed with my authority. I don't know if people go around spending money. Why do you make me the election candidate responsible for this?
so it's
This
as
is
good as
always been the difficulty in election expenses. The ability to prove that this expense was authorized by the candidate or his election agent is the biggest hurdle always.
so I was
And that
just
is
trying-
true of today's rupee, that will be today of tomorrow's rupee also.
Yeah. So if we can just make them like have one bank account and spend everything from there, if you can mandate it now, you can do it on digital rupee also. Like how do you stop them from spending from other sources? Like cash and other forms are also going to exist. Or someone's digital rupee can also be spent. Right? We cannot stop them from spending someone else's digital rupee. You can have one account, you can track all the expenses of that particular account, but that problem has to be solved in a wholesome manner.
See, basically, the approach to the problem should be solved. Today, there is nothing. So whether it is this rupee or that rupee, the problem remains. You have solved the approach to the problem with regard to this rupee, then it is easily solvable for the digital rupee also.
See, this solution lies at the government's will and their intention. So I think
Absolutely,
whatever we
agree.
discuss is of no relevance.
Yeah.
It's up to what they are thinking, how much transparency they want to bring in election funding, and what rules they want to make. Rest is of no use actually.
Otherwise, it's no use. I think it is 7 o'clock now. You still have questions?
One we can take two, last 2 minutes.
Take one more, sir.
Yes,
Um,
one minute, yes, all right.
And the question is, will the Aadhaar identity be linked to the wallet that belongs to the person? This is again an implementation question.
One doesn't know.
Like a sort of a,
We don't know,
how
right?
they
It
do
goes
in
back to the
China.
same anonymity
Another
question.
variable.
Till the
We
time
had
there is a
another
clear
variable.
framework,
Member
the same
will
thing.
only tell us whether they link it to Aadhaar, link it to PAN, link it to your Kundali, or link it to your thumb impression, or link it to your iris. It all depends on what the law is ultimately.
So
whether they
essentially
want
we are-
all the digital money to be upfront, full KYC or identifiable, or they are okay up to certain value, certain transactions. We not really have an answer to those questions, as sir said. The moment first, whether it should be available in the country or not, once that is done, then all these questions needs to be discussed, deliberated in the public domain, gather all of that. Thankfully, solutions are available to all of these problems. Technology is available.
See, the technology is not behind. It is the political will that is not working.
It's intention and what exactly we want as an outcome.
So we've
Like
done a lot
something
of.
like having a loaded gun. What do you want to do with it? Shoot deer, shoot a ferocious animal, or shoot the next human being? That depends on you. Technology is available equally.
Yeah.
So we have another question coming up, and this we've done. We've talked a lot about cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, Ethereum, digital rupees, similarities, dissimilarities. The one question that's directed to Arjun, and it is: could you explain what stable coins are,
Okay. So see.
and what's the difference
happened-
between Bitcoin and stable coin?
So what people have realized is this blockchain is an amazing technology. Everyone wants to copy it. So central banks like RBI, the Chinese central bank, they all want to use this underlying technology to run their own fiat currency as a on top of these things, right? But before these guys could do it, private players have already done this, right? A lot of people want the comfort of sovereign currency, like a fiat currency. Dollar, it's kind of stable. It's easy to make payments in terms of dollar, right? But the technology is so this thing, right? It's very difficult to send. So what they have done is the same like Ethereum platform, they created a token where that one token will always be equal to $1, right? And then use it in the crypto ecosystem. So there are different stable coins like USDT, USDC, BUSD, GUSD.
Even Facebook is coming out with a stable coin, right?
Yes,
DM.
that's like a basket
That's
of
called
currency.
DM.
It's not DM.
It's called the DM, right? Its value is
Yeah,
linked
yeah.
to a basket of currencies,
Basket of
right?
currencies.
Right.
So like Arjun said that because you don't want fluctuation, this is a stability, or like sir said earlier, that if you want stability, the private players, if they want to facilitate transactions across borders using blockchain technologies, and they are providing this, which is mostly for transactions, simplification of let's say, a lot of other processes that complicates the process.
So people don't invest in it because the stable coins remain stable. There is no returns on the stable coin unless you want to get the exposure of this thing. But mostly they use it for transactions, facilitate transactions.
That doesn't run 10x immediately.
So it
Manu,
take
should
over
we
the-
take just one last before we wrap up? Or
Yes, yes, we could take one.
yeah,
last
one
question.
last. Thanks.
Is it possible? Is it possible that because it's the currency in your wallet or whatever your device is digital, that is, you have digital rupees. Could it be deleted by an authority? I mean, by some super overriding command? Could the
Again, policy decision, but they will definitely
That-
want to have that feature in their system that they design.
would that not go against every
That is
tenet of law?
Fundamental of privacy law.
See, it goes back to
Exactly.
policies, as sir said. See,
Exactly.
imagine you had some scamster running away with the money. Sitting here, you could just, mark that
Today-
money
today
and
the
use it.
point
Yes,
is,
but who's to decide that?
ran away with the money and
Government.
become a
Like sir
citizen.
said, there has to be a process and policy for all these important things. Technology is like a loaded gun, as he said. These are all available possibilities.
Where do you want to shoot and whom do you want to shoot is the question.
Yes.
Mutable, unmutable, mute, unmute, all those are possible.
Yeah.
It's just like freezing the bank account, freezing your debit cards, credit cards.
Right,
Same.
fixing bank account, there is absolutely. That's what they're
Same
doing
thing.
now. ED attaching all the bank accounts. That law is there. Similarly, you can have a law that will attach all the, and you will be compelled to give that key. What do you call that? Crypto key or
Private.
whatever that key to access the account. That public key
Yes.
or private key, whatever you call it. That can be done. If you can mandate your thumb impression, if you can mandate your biometric, why can't you mandate your crypto key? But then it should be done only under extraordinary circumstances. That is why the question of fundamental rights.
That would be totally Orwellian. I mean, that the state can
That
suddenly
exactly.
delete the amount of money sitting in your wallet.
I have used that word Orwellian so many times.
See, the technology with potential, it could be utopian.
Demonetization, digital demonetization.
Okay, so
That would be called digital demonetization.
So
Yes.
thank you so much for a wonderful discussion. I think we can go on and on. There are plenty of questions there, which
actually
are
we're
still.
just getting started. There's so many nuances to this.
Yes, absolutely. I think we should do a part 2 of this, if that's okay. I mean, thank you so much for an extremely insightful discussion. I'm thankful to all the audience who joined us today. And Nina, would you like to add on?
Yes, sure, Vanita. Thank you, everyone. I think this was the most insightful discussion on a topic that has certainly caused everyone's imagination. The debate is still on if cryptocurrency will be a store of value or not. Will it ever have an inherent value? And the discussion, as Vanita says, is still on. And there will be a part 2 at Chennai International Center. We look forward definitely to see what the government has in store and how they will be incorporating cryptocurrencies into our legal tender and our daily life. It will be a very interesting watch for sure. Thank you, Justice Sri Krishna, Arjun, Naveen, and Manu for this very interesting discussion today. And thank you again for being at Chennai International Center. Thank you.
Thank you, Manu. It was lovely working with all of you.
Thank you.
And I
Thank
hope
you so much.
you will join us again for the next panel. Thank you so much.
And
Right.
the
Thank
law
you so
comes in, we all sit together and debate.
Yeah, felt out of
Thank
place
you.
with experienced people.
Thank you
Like
so
a
much.
great experience.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, good evening and
Thank
have a
you.
good weekend. Bye, sir.
Good night.